Each of us has parents, or at least had parents. Today we are analyzing the film The Father. We will see whether everything is like this in this movie, whether everything corresponds to the basics of neurology of psychiatry, or whether the authors have embellished something. She just called me. Well, what does this mean? You can't treat people like that. It's my apartment. It's amazing. You're bursting into my room. I don't know what kind of woman she is. I didn't ask for anything.
Энтони Хопкинс играет, совершенно талантливо играет человека, страдающего деменцией в результате тяжелой болезни Альцгеймера. Это уже поздняя стадия неврологической.
This is a neurological disease when a person not only loses memory, he loses touch with reality, he seems to speak absolutely adequately, speaks clearly, looks decent. There is a dialogue that is absolutely connected, organically transited.
Мне не нужна никакая помощь. Что ты, с чего ты взяла? Я в своей квартире нахожусь. Но вот это внешнее состояние нормального человека очень обманчиво. Особенно для пациентов с болезнью Альцгеймера. В нашей практике мы очень часто видим, что пациент выглядит очень хорошо, как Энтони Хопкинс, разговаривает вроде абсолютно адекватно, но у него тяжелая деменция. И в последующих отрывках мы увидим...
We see how the authors of this movie talentedly reveal the problem of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So you leave when, that is, to whom, he lives in Paris, and therefore I need to move. Where to Paris? You will see how the bizarre shots change, and the characters change, except for Anthony Hopkins. He talks to his daughter about her upcoming trip. But is it his daughter? Whether she's going to Paris or not, that's the big question. Because with Alzheimer's disease, pseudo-reminiscences, false memories, and even hallucinations are very common, which we'll see in the following excerpts. Who are you? Where did you come from? What are you doing in my apartment? I live here, you know. And I'm her husband. When? But soon it'll be 10 years. Anthony Hopkins, or rather his character, is genuinely perplexed. What kind of person is he? He's lost his memory, or he sees a person who doesn't exist in reality. That is, he develops a hallucination. That's the question. I would like to emphasize that what we see here is the late stages of Alzheimer's disease. When a person has these hallucinations, either he hears some voices or sees non-existent people and many relatives. It literally kills a loved one, father or mother, who they remember so vividly from childhood, that was bright, interesting, beautiful and smart, all suddenly morphs into a person who speaks whatever comes to mind and talks about things that don't even exist. In the early stages, there may just appear light forgetfulness, scattered thoughts, or perhaps aggression. We see here the fully unmasked, developed stage of this grave disease. Something is off. What kind of nonsense? What do you mean? Where is Anne? I'm here. I just ran errands to the store and back. Everything is clear. In previous episodes, you saw that Anne, the daughter of Anthony Hopkins' character, looks completely different, and yet he doesn't recognize her. A question arises for us, the viewers, Where's the hallucination in the first episode or in this episode? And it might exactly happen like that literally this suddenly happens and the person leaves the house, returns, and the patient forgets about them. There's a loss of short-term memory, kind of like when you walk on the sand, on the shore of the sea, and the waves quickly start to wash away the traces behind you. Very often many relatives say, we're talking with our dad, mom, grandpa, and they keep coming back to the same conversation, the same topic of conversation, the same problem, and talks about the same thing for hours. Anthony Hopkins skillfully shows that
Энтони Хопкинс талантливо показывает, что
the patient is either trying to reconcile with the false reality, or this reality is false or true. He can no longer figure it out. His brain is affected by a serious illness.
поражен тяжелой болезнью.
In this situation, throughout the film, we see this struggle of consciousness, subconscious, real world, and unreal world in the image of Anthony Hopkins. I was alone in the apartment and some noise. I came to see your husband. What husband? Your husband. I don't have a husband. What?
У меня нет мужа.
Sorry, but I divorced more than 5 years ago. You remember? You
Развелась
remember?
5 с лишним лет назад, ты же помнишь?
Ты же помнишь,
The key phrase of my daughter, many of my patients, or rather their relatives, are driven to despair that their close, beloved parents
приводит в отчаяние, что их близкие, любимые родители
or a parent, they forget their face, name, daughter, son, grandson, forget the bright moments of life, their life together, and this makes them very bitter.
этого им очень горько.
Please understand that these are signs of illness, not just the whimsical behavior of a person.
Человека.
I will not give up the apartment, but this is not your apartment, Anthony. This is my apartment, isn't it? I know. No, you have no idea.
Нет, ты не представляешь, как бывает тяжело. На днях он меня вообще не узнал.
Авторы фильма показывают еще одну проблему взаимоотношения
Relatives dealing with a sick person. Notice he seems to move around the apartment, whistles, drinks. Everything functions for him. His arms, legs, and his speech is normal, but he is seriously ill. He cannot be left alone. And another very important aspect. Notice how aggressively he talks about the apartment. I often hear these dialogues, or rather, the patient's relatives discuss with despair how their parents accuse them of being self-serving and say, now they will take away my apartment, even though the son or daughter purchased this apartment with these parents. But fear arises, fear of loss. What a person is most afraid of losing is their shelter. Another factor comes up, aggression, which we will see a bit later in the following excerpts from this movie. The patient's aggression toward the world, toward his loved ones. Aggression, which we will see slightly later in the following clips from this film. The patient's aggression towards the world and his loved ones. In this movie, the intertwining of false memories, the fabricated world a person inhabits, the real world, and the overlay of one world over another, one idea over another, is depicted very well. That's how it happens. An individual has been, he lives in his daughter's apartment, but he treats it, this apartment, as if it were his own home, and his awareness begins to reject the reality of what's happening. He starts living in his own imaginary world. And I danced. Yes, yes, Dad, you were an engineer. And how would you know? Very often, relatives of Alzheimer's patients are thrown off as their loved ones suddenly begin to remember something, truly remember, or they behave very appropriately. Well, he's cheerful like in this episode, he's joking. But these mood swings are also very characteristic of Alzheimer's disease, from serious aggression to uncontrolled merriment. Anthony Hopkins portrays this wonderfully in the episode we watched, and I believe that you're trying to trick me just to gain control over my apartment. I'm not going to let you have my apartment, and I probably will outlive you. This conflict, brewing inside and outside between us, is very common to relationships with relatives of Alzheimer's patients. No wonder relatives of patients who are affected by severe stages of Alzheimer's are sent on vacation. Relatives of Alzheimer's patients at later stages get a vacation. You heard it right. Not because they're ill, but because their loved one is ill. Enduring such psychological pressure for a long time is incredibly tough for anyone.
В течение длительного времени очень тяжело любому человеку.
Что?
Did the daughter strangle her own father? No, she imagined it because she was really sick of going back to her normal life.
Ее действительно допекло. И вновь возвращается к обычной жизни.
Can I ask you a question? How much longer are you going to hang around here and blow everyone's brains out? Relatives of a patient suffering from Alzheimer's disease, they cannot live an ordinary life. Their whole life is subordinated to their entire time. Well, if not to the constant care of their sick relative, then to control him. In the end, the control is already carried out, if I may say so in quotation marks. The control is carried out by the disease. It presses on them. It controls the whole life.
Она управляет всей жизнью.
Surrounding. Do you live with your daughter now? Yeah, sure, that one didn't go to Paris. I'm staying in London. She forgot. You're getting sclerosis. I'd talk to the doctor about it. I often see a similar situation at receptions. A relative of the patient comes. The patient himself sits, decently dressed, just like Anthony Hopkins' character, a good suit, a good tie, speaks sensibly, very clearly, seems to explain to the doctor clearly. About his daughter who requires treatment, he slightly mocks her too, saying, "You have sclerosis." He talks about Paris. Here we see another chain of events that has become ingrained in the mind of a sick person. You're going to Paris, you're not going to Paris. That is to say that there is a watch, there is an apartment, there is the Paris question.
очередной раз мы видим еще одну плоскость в воображении, в сознании пациента, страдающего болезнью Альцгеймера.
Доктор знает, что говорит. Придет момент, и как бы она ни была хороша...
Once again we see another layer of complexity.
Иди сюда.
Придет момент, просто как бы она ни была хороша, он болен. Энн.
Иди, папа. Проходи, садись.
Contemplating the fact that one must transition from being a caregiver to more drastic measures, like needing a nursing home, requiring a place where the patient will be under constant supervision.
Более к решительным шагам. Нужен пансионат, нужно какое-то место, где пациент будет находиться под круглосуточным.
This is a hard decision for many relatives of dementia patients to make, but it comes anyway.
Это тяжелый выбор.
In this episode, it's shown how desperate Anthony's daughter's husband is.
Показано, как с отчаянием муж дочери персонажа Энтони Хопкинса говорит об этом. Надо принимать решение. Он болен, пойми, пожалуйста. Родственникам придется делать определенный выбор. Не потому, что они плохие, и они изгоняют из этой квартиры больного человека. Скорее, это благо для всех. И для родственников, и для самого пациента. Но в этом эпизоде, будьте внимательны, был очень важный и очень интересный прием, который использовали кинематографисты. Энтони Хопкинс, вернее его персонаж, проживает...
Sometimes the same episode happens twice, and this enhances our perception of the tragedy of the situation, that this person is seriously ill, their brain is severely impacted by the irreversible process of neurodegeneration that happens in Alzheimer's disease. You intend on continuing to ruin your daughter's life. Stop, that's enough. Dad, what's going on? It's already 8 in the evening, it just turned morning. I just woke up. Look, in this particularly heavy episode, a classic hallucination is displayed. Two people appear, two men, as a matter of fact. Obviously, no one beat him. And this is something that we often hear from patients' relatives when the patient sincerely talks about a physical impact or some phenomenon that is happening to him right now. The second thing is very important. A phenomenon, a symptom, a sign of losing track of time. It is very characteristic of the later stages of Alzheimer's disease, when a person loses the sense of time and space, be it morning, day, evening, and they cry and tear themselves apart in such a way.
Your daughter's heart is much like a hotel, isn't it? Considering all the tenants say so.
Правда? Все жильцы так говорят. Думаешь,
But I believe you'll be better off here.
здесь,
Где?
здесь. По-моему, здесь
Here,
будет
in my
спокойнее
view,
и приятнее
you'll
для
find
тебя,
more peace and
раз мы с
comfort,
тобой вместе решили,
as we've
что ты
decided
переедешь
together
сюда.
that you would move here.
Пациент оказывается
Eventually,
в
the
хосписе.
patient finds himself in a hospice at a specialized institution
Наблюдать.
where he will
Я
constantly be
обращаю
under
внимание,
surveillance.
с какой
I would like to emphasize the gentleness with which the transition from an apartment to a medical facility is portrayed. The filmmakers effectively show the sincere love of a close individual towards their father.
любовь близкого человека к своему отцу.
She didn't just toss him out on
На улицу и не вышвырнул в какую-то богадельню. Она старается сделать так, чтобы ее близкому было хорошо. Но персонаж Энтони Хопкинса, и вот эта фраза его «Где я нахожусь?» это еще один яркий симптом, который, может быть, ускользнул от вашего внимания, но симптом потери времени и пространства.
Все хорошо?
Этот, который... Кто он?
Это Билл. Вы видитесь каждый день.
Правда? А вы?
Что?
Простите за вопрос. А вы-то сами... Кто вы?
Кто вы? Кто он? Ускользание памяти. Она, как шагреневая кожа, все съеживается и съеживается до невообразимо коротких пределов. Он не узнает врача, который заходит к нему каждый день на обход. Он не знает...
He knows the nurse. He sees in the doctor the very enemy, the pseudo-husband of his daughter. And this is another vivid example of classic pseudo-reminiscence, false memory along with shortening, shrinking short-term memory. And very often I am told by relatives of patients, our grandfather, grandmother, father, mother feel great. They remember the times of the Komsomol, pioneers, their work. They remember algebra, professional activities, yes, but they can forget the name, the image, and even the very fact of the doctor coming in every day, like in this episode. Well, that's it, quietly, quietly, everything will be fine in a minute, I promise, everything will be fine.
Все будет хорошо через минутку, я обещаю. Все будет хорошо.
Well, in the end, filmmakers show that patience, tolerance, if does not help a person to recover, then at least helps him.
Что терпение, терпимость, если не помогает выздороветь человеку, то, по крайней мере, помочь ему.
We can't always cure a person, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't help them.
Что мы не должны помогать ему.
And this also applies to Alzheimer's disease.
Берегите себя,
Remember your parents and your loved ones.
помните о ваших родителях.